Alright, next up here we're going to do the eyes tutorial. Eyes are pretty quick. Everyone has their own way of doing it, and I tell people, find your own ways of doing things, but for those of you looking for a starting point and just trying to figure out why eyes do certain things that they do, then maybe this will be a little bit of help to you. So, let's get things started here. First thing that I tell people is to keep things nice and organized. And from a previous tutorial I showed all the ways to do skin tones. And since I'm going to be moving on to something else, and the skin tones of this character are pretty much where I want them to be, I can just commit them all into a single layer by selecting the whole thing. So hold down Shift and click between all those and press Control and E to merge them together. So now my skin tones are in their own separate layer right here, and I'll even go so far as to lock them just to make sure I don't accidentally mess them up. So anyway, let's go back to our flats layer, and in the same way that I got my skin tones layer, I'm going to select the color wand. The tolerance is at 0, anti-alias is off, I'm going to turn contiguous off, and sample all layers are off. So with my flats layer selected, I'm going to click on her eyes, and I'm going to click on the whites of her eyes. So now I have just her eyes selected, and to separate them from the flats, I am going to press Control and J. So now the eyes are in their own separate layer. So that is what I want. First thing I'm going to do with the eyes is going to select my color wand, going to click on the pupils and the iris. I'm going to set it to a fairly small hard edge brush, and I'm going to set the color of my brush to the eyes. So I'm going to hold down Alt, click on the green, and I'm going to set the brush mode to multiply, set the flow to 100%. I'm going to turn up the opacity, let's make it 70% like that. In fact, let's make it 90%. I want it to be more intense than that, and even smaller of a brush than it is. So instead of going with 9, we're going with a 6 sized brush. And I'm just going to make this radial motion going around like so. Do the same thing over here. So it makes a radial motion stemming out from where her pupils would be. I'm going to set it to screen now. I'm going to turn down the opacity just a little bit. And again, just going to go around a little bit further apart than I did last time, just so I get this contrasty radial like fibers being pulled into the middle. And that's the starting point for doing eyes. Now I'm going to set it again to multiply. And you'll notice in eyes, kind of around the edges of the pupils, they get a little bit darker, so I'm going to use a feathered brush. Just kind of darken them like that. Darken them like that. And then I'm going to actually define the pupil using a hard edge brush. I'm going to set the opacity to 100%. And I am just going to keep going into it like that, gradually pushing it out until we get a nice looking pupil right there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, just like that. And then the final step is going to be giving the pupils a little bit of shine, so I'm going to set it to color dodge. I'm going to turn down the opacity to about 50%. And I'm just going to dab a little bit here. Just to create the shine on the pupils. Just kind of give them a little bit more of a reflective texture. And now the pupils are done. I don't have to worry about those anymore. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, kind of in the same way that I shaded the skin tones in the previous tutorial, I'm going to shade the eyes in the same exact way. So I'm going to select the same shadow color that I used earlier, going to create a new layer, going to hold down Alt and press Delete, so I get this whole purple thing. The reason why the skin tones don't turn purple is because they're higher up in the order layer, so don't worry about that. And then I'm going to link this layer to the eyes that I have right there. So to link it, hold down Alt, click in between the two layers. So now the eyes are purple, as they should be. I'm going to set the layer mode from normal to multiply. I'm going to give this layer an alpha channel using, let me just zoom in on the correct button. I'm going to click on this button right here, add layer mask. So now it adds a layer mask right there. Zoom back out. And now it's going to be a really simple shading process where I just erase away the shadow and then paint it back in for the drop shadows. So I'm going to set my eraser. I'm going to set its opacity to 30%, set its flow to 30%. In fact, since it's going to be so simple, I'm going to turn up the opacity to 70% because I don't really need to make too many details. And just like that, bring the eyes back out. So now they have a little bit of curvature to them. This back eye right here, I'm going to set the opacity to 30%, just make it a little bit darker because not as much light is hitting it. Even define the underside of this eye a little bit more. I'm going to right click, set my brush to something really hard, set the opacity to 100%, set the flow to 100%. And I'm just going to create a drop shadow for where the eyelid would be covering it up, just like that. And then a little bit of a drop shadow for where the nose would be covering it up. And even just a little bit. This isn't a drop shadow per se, as much as it is just a reflection of the eyelashes around it, but it would look the same, so I'm going to do it in the same layer anyway. So smudge it just so we can get it a little bit nicer, more organized like that. Get a nice harder edge like that. And then going to select the two layers by holding down Shift, hold down Alt to make a duplicate of them. I'm going to press Control E to merge them together. So now this layer is the exact same thing as these two layers put together. So with this layer, I'm going to select my highlight brush, color dodge, that is correct, 50%. Let's make it 20% like that. Set it to a nice feathered brush like that. I'm just going to make a couple of extra strokes like that, just kind of define the eye a little bit more, give it a little bit more contrast, because the eye is supposed to have a lot of weight to it. You're supposed to be drawn immediately to it. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a glare. Now, we've got a lot of lines on top of this eye already. And what we want to do is we want a glare that appears above it. So we're going to have to create a whole new layer above the lines layer. So create a new layer. We're going to name it Glare. And the layer mode is going to be set to normal, so that is good. And the way we're going to create a shine on the eye is we're going to use our brush tool, set it to a hard edge brush. Color dodge should work just fine, and we're going to turn up the opacity a good amount, so about 70%. And we're just going to create a little blotch like that right there, and a little blotch right there, and a couple other blotches like that. And you can't really see them too much right now, that's fine. But you'll see that since it's above the lines layer, I'm able to overcome things like the pupil and the edges of the iris that were defined in the line art. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give just a little bit more intensity to those blotches I already put in. And now since these highlights right here are going to be reflecting stuff that's already in the environment, something like this, for example, this pink rim light I set for the skin tones, I'm going to select that same pink, keep it at color dodge, going to set it to a feathered brush, Going to reduce the opacity. That's going to make it a little bit more pink, just like that. So a little more pink right there. And then since this is going to be a yellow color, I really want to use a brighter yellow. I'll even make it an orangish color so it really pops out. And there we go. What you can do later on with the eyes is you can just go into your flats, and if you, for example, let's merge all these together. So that's the finished eyes right there. You can always access your flats layer, select something like the pupils, and go into your eyes. And if you want to change the color of the eyes later on, so for example, let's say I'm making this for a client and he said the eyes are blue, they're not green, it's as simple as just changing the hue saturation like that. So I can give this character blue eyes if I wanted to. Or if they complain that the green eyes are too bright, I can always just darken it like so. But for now, I'm just going to keep them the way that they are. Maybe give them just a little bit of yellow in the highlights, but you see what I'm doing here. And as I always say, make sure that you keep your layers nice and organized. And since this is done, since my skin tones here are done, and since my eyes here are done, and since if I ever need to edit any of them, I can always just edit them through the flats. There's no point in keeping them separate if I can just separate them out as easily with the flats layer. So save the memory, save the hard drive space, merge your layers together. So now, in this one layer, I have both the completed eyes and the completed skin tones. And that concludes the eyes tutorial. This was just a very quick one, since eyes are, you know, they're very commonly well done, and they don't take too long to do. And everybody has their own way of doing eyes, but for some reason people just love doing eye tutorials anyway, so this is my eye tutorial. So if you have any questions or comments or other feedback you'd like to pass my way, you can send them to me. You can find me on DeviantArt at vest.deviantart.com, or you can email me at daviddelante@gmail.com. Thank you all for swinging by, and hope you found this quite helpful. Thank you.